You are in for another treat in this episode. Carmine Militano is somebody who is a leader with a huge desire to learn and grow. And this is something that is really common among the best leaders that I come across. It's not always highly educated people academically, but the greatest leaders that I know are always highly educated, sometimes through experience, which we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about what a T-shaped leader is and how to develop these people in your organization to make your organization more robust. A question you need to ask yourself is your organization ready for any change that comes your way? Well, T-shaped leaders are going to help you with this. Carmine has done something significant. He's come in from outside of an organization to a family organization that was already really good. It was a really strong organization. And he has worked with the existing team to make things even better than they were. And he very clearly states that the team has helped him with this. They've worked together on this. You'll quickly hear that, and this is coming back to my first point, that he is extremely well read. He is a serial learner himself. And again, I'm just going to emphasize that it is so important to be in constant growth mode. He will talk about this as he talks about T-shaped leaders. A couple other things that we're going to touch on. One, we're going to be talking about the importance of the context of AI and the world that we're living in and how to make the best use of AI. This went in a different direction than I thought it was going to go. And then he also talked about how muscle memory in individuals takes time to relearn, to reteach with staff, both in the in-office staff as well as that frontline on the tool staff that is involved in his industry. Again, you're in for a treat. I'm looking forward to hearing your responses to this. Enjoy the episode. I'm not sure where this day finds you for this episode. It is afternoon for Carmine and I, so good afternoon from here. Carmine, I'd like to just introduce you a little bit. You're somebody that I got to meet when I went down to Winnipeg. This is probably just over a year and a half ago, when Mike was down as well. It was good to see you there. Good to see the organization and everything that's happening with Boxstall. But what I'm going to do is just open it up for you. Feel free to maybe start with your story. Share your business journey and your story a little bit. I think that this is a really fascinating starting point, and we're going to be able to jump in from here in a number of different directions.
Well, thanks, Mark. And I do want to start by saying it's a pleasure to be here, and I just want to thank you for the opportunity. So my story starts in 1980, or my business journey starts in 1980. I graduated with a degree in civil engineering from the University of Manitoba. So I've been doing this for a long time. During that time, I've spent 27 years in the consulting business, spent 6 years in the concrete products business. Some might say it's a rite of passage for someone of Italian descent. And then the last 12 years, of course, with Boxstall Construction. And in that time, I've had the opportunity to work for good regional firms, firms located in Manitoba, with an internationally renowned firm. It was called CH2M Hill, now part of the Jacobs family, and Stantec Consulting. And Stantec, of course, is a publicly listed company who, again, has a global presence. They're certainly moving out into the global presence. And in the last 12 years, I've been here. So that entire journey has left me with a lot of lessons learned over the years. And it's interesting how they're all different, right? They're all sort of part of that progression. And sitting on top of that, of course, is I'm a first generation Canadian born in Canada. My parents immigrated from Italy. And from them, I inherited, courage, perseverance, an incredible work ethic is what they had, love of family, all of that. I was educated by Jesuits. I went to a Jesuit high school, and, faith, service, and excellence form who I am, and wanting to be and striving to be a person for others is also part of who I am. And I share all of that because all of that needs to come together. I can't disassociate who I am with what I do for a living. And fortunately, I've had the opportunity virtually my entire career to live at the confluence of all that. And I do want to give a plug to traits. So if you take a look at my traits profile, and I'm thankful for this, is if you take a look at my profile and you take a look at my adjusted work profile, they sit right on top of each other. And that is, I think, somewhat unusual sometimes. And so, again, I've had the good fortune to do things that I guess I'm naturally suited to do. So that's a bit of the background of my journey. Happy to answer any questions in terms of any part of that journey.
Yeah, so I think where I'm gonna first jump in here, Carmen, is to talk about a T-shaped leader because you mentioned this on the phone in our pre-interview call, and I was just thinking about T-shaped leaders in general and saying there's so much importance here with your journey. So maybe go back to with your journey in the background. What is the importance of a T-shaped leader? Explain from maybe for the beginners out there or people who might not know what the term means. What is a T-shaped leader, and what is the value of having T-shaped leaders as managers?
Yeah. Happy to answer that. So I'm a firm believer in building T-shaped leaders within our organization and elsewhere. And basically, if you can imagine the vertical in the T, that's technical depth, technical expertise. You've got to be good at something, and you got to want to be the best at something. So, the deeper that is, the better you are at it. That's the I. Then you cross that T. And when you cross it, and the breadth of that T is dependent on your worldview, your ability to think critically. Your the notion that we live in a civil society and you need to contribute and be a positive contributor to civil society, the ability to communicate, to lead, all of those things are a choice. The kind of thing about T-shaped leader is becoming a T-shaped leader, first of all, is a lot of work. You have to be a serial learner, but it's also a choice. And it's a choice that you make in order to quite frankly, future protect your career. With the advent of AI, and I heard somebody make this quip the other day, and I don't know who it is, so I can't give appropriate attribution. But they said when it comes to AI, you're either at the table or on the menu. So being a T-shaped leader ensures that you're at the table, that you're part of the human plus machine story and not human who is replaced by a machine story. Now, this is not triggered by AI, by the way. I've been preaching T-shaped leadership for almost as long as I've been preaching, I guess. And I think it's just so important in terms of building out our leaders and making sure that they can survive in a period of what has now become constant uncertainty. I've been through the Great Recession of 1980. It's when I graduated in 1981, the recession of 1990, the financial collapse of 2008, the global pandemic. And what I've learned through all of that is that it's about resilience. And T-shaped leadership is all about resilience. If you're a T-shaped leader, you're agile, you know what's happening in the world around you, you're sensitive to all those external factors, and you can navigate your career, you can, future-proof your career, and most importantly, you can enhance your personal brand. So that T-shape becomes who you are. And personal branding, by the way, we all have one. The issue is, do you want to do it by intention, or do you want to just happen to you? Either way, you're going to have a personal brand. T-shaped leadership is about intentionality and building your personal brand by intent.
I am. I do a little bit of consulting on my own, and I love talking about finances. I think that financial education is something that we're simply lacking, generally speaking, in our society. So much of the time, I think people run away from understanding more about finances. I'm talking about just the average human being here because it's scary. And I go, but this is just foundational. If you have a foundation in understanding how money works, it helps set you up in everyday life because it's part of everyday life. And as you're talking about T-shaped leadership, I'm thinking about how if anyone wants to be a manager of any other human being, they need to broaden their scope a little bit. They need to be willing, as you said, a choice to learn and grow so that they can handle more situations, because managing is part of everyone's life. If you're a parent, you're a manager on some level.
Oh,
If you
for sure.
in so many situations we're hit with management on some level. But I mean, obviously you're talking about it in a different context at the top of an organization. One thing that you said was that it helps with resilience. And for me, where I go initially, when I think about T-shaped leaders, I initially think it goes to breadth of experience and skill set. And if somebody can pull in different skills that they've learned in different areas, that they can bring that to the current situation. I haven't thought about it specifically from the perspective of resilience, but I think that's really important. So maybe go in depth there. How does this experience, this skill, the willingness to be a serial learner, as you said, how does that help with resilience, building resilience for ourselves?
Great question. So a couple of things. So it's being a serial learner and also being really comfortable with change. If you can accept the fact that life is all about change And part of our human existence is to be adaptable. By the way, Darwin is often misquoted. It's not survival of the fittest. It's survival of the most adaptable. And so adaptability is built into what we need to do. And so when we take a look in the context of T-shaped leadership and resilience, if you are sensitive to the external forces over which we have no control and know what's happening around us, and at the same time look for the opportunity. Every challenge brings with it an opportunity. Somebody described a slide guitar as the only instrument that allows you to hit the notes between the notes. That's what T-shaped leaders are about. Recognizing and looking for the notes between the notes, looking for those white space opportunities, understanding what's happening around you, understanding how you need to adapt, where you can be proactive, where you're playing offense, where you're playing defense. You need to understand all of those things in the broader context or have change happen to you. And so that's where resilience comes in. If you're comfortable in that, quite frankly, whatever happens, happens, and you're able to navigate your way through it, and not, but navigate and thrive. The military has a term called VUCA, right? Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. To say that we live in a VUCA world, I mean, it's absolutely no question that's where we are. So how do you navigate your way through a VUCA world? How do you thrive in a VUCA world? It's by being that T-shaped leader, seeing those things before others see it, and then, having a bias to action. Making sure, to be comfortable with change means to be comfortable taking action with maybe 70% of the information, 80%, but in no way, shape, or form are you waiting for 100% of the information. At that point, you're just a follower, and there's no fun in following.
I agreed. For any leader, I agree completely. So I am thinking about the context of maybe the owner of a company thinking about who they're hiring for management roles, upper management roles, but I'm also thinking from the perspective of somebody who wants to be in an upper management role. From both perspectives, I ask the question, hey, how do you set this up? Because our education system does the exact opposite. Our education system, the higher you go up, the more specialized you are getting, that technical knowledge, that vertical T that you talked about, and almost to oblivion, where you're an expert on this one disease or one bacterium that can affect a gnat, but you don't know anything else about the world. What is the balance for both hiring, looking for these T-shaped leaders, as well as becoming a T-shaped leader?
Yeah, so when we're hiring, what are we hiring for? So we have this view that on the vertical, you have to have some basic fundamental skills. It starts with being intentional about those as well. So we've identified, I think, 13 competencies for most of our job family profiles. And so we look for, alignment with those competencies. But we're also really comfortable that we can teach you anything you need to know with respect to how you do, how you basically enact those competencies within our business model. On the T-shaped side, on the horizontal, we're looking for different things. We're looking for fire in the belly. We're looking for culture fit. We're looking for somebody who's really self-aware. We're looking for somebody who has a broad perspective. We're looking for someone who has a lot of different interests, who's able, one thing about T-shaped leaders is they're able to look at the world around them and bring something that they hear, the best practice from a completely separate, completely different industry and adapt it to what we do. And those are the kinds of things we ask. During the interview process, that's what we're looking for. I don't think I've ever even looked at a resume in an interview because, if you didn't have that basic skill set, you wouldn't be there anyway. So, let's get a little bit deeper on things that are really, because we can't teach those things. There's a saying that says you can't teach speed. When you're coaching, you can't teach speed. And it's kind of the same with a culture, fire in the belly. You can't teach those things. Those things are innate, I believe. And our role as leaders is to help you flourish if you have all of that, right? Is to help you grow.
Okay, so you're obviously looking for somebody with that fire in the belly, as you mentioned, and some skill, technical knowledge. How do you then raise up leaders? So they've got the fundamentals. The fundamentals are there. How are you raising up leaders now? Are you simply broadening out that horizontal line?
So a couple things. One of the things I think, part of our role as leaders is to inspire others. If we can't get them to rally around a purpose that's greater than us, it's pretty tough. Then they're just coming to work every day. We're in our industry, we're fortunate that we're in the business of changing and building infrastructure that wasn't there yesterday. And in the process, you know, strengthening our society. That's a big purpose to get your head around. And that's great. We do, talk an awful lot about building your personal brand, and again, making that choice because not everybody makes it, Mark. Not everybody chooses to be that T-shaped leader, right? So you need to make that choice to want to do that, and then we have to challenge our people. We have to challenge them to get there. There are no entitlements. One thing that I've learned in my 45 years of doing this, nobody owes me a single thing. Every day I got to show up and every day I got to earn it. And that's our culture. That's our philosophy. Every day you got to show up and every day you got to earn it. And you can see the people who want to do that. The people who come in and sit down and ask you a bunch of different questions, the people who are world aware, who are able to strike up a conversation. You watch them socially. If we attend an awful lot of fundraising dinners and charity dinners and events, and it's fascinating watching our emerging leaders in that environment. Are they able to engage? Can they engage with confidence? Or are they shrinking violets in a corner? So you put them in those kinds of situations that are outside of our norm and just watch what happens and see how they react and see if they're flourishing or ducking.
Now you are doing a lot of raising up leaders at Boxtel. So maybe give me a bit of the story. How did you come to your present organization? What is it about? Explain what Boxtel does, and then maybe share a little bit about what your journey has been in the company.
Sure. So it's an interesting story, actually. So, first of all, Boxtel is 113 years old. It's fourth generation. The Boxtel family has been in continuous operation for 113 years. I was the only person who doesn't have the last name of Boxtel to be invited into partnership, and I'm very much humbled by that. But anyhow, so it's always had a reputation for quality. It's always had a reputation for integrity, always had a reputation for honesty and for giving back to the community. Those things are near and dear to my heart. John and I actually went to university together, and we graduated together in 1980. Nick Boxtel, who's one of our co-presidents currently, he worked with me and for me at Stantec. So there's been these various ties. But the pivotal moment came when we were doing work. I was at Stantec, and we had a major project that I was leading the team on, and was invited by the owners, who are one of the largest corporations in the world, to sit at the selection table. And we had invited three national firms in Boxall Construction. And so they presented. And what became pretty aware, pretty sort of evident, if you will, was that if Boxall, if John wanted to compete at the national level, then have to raise kind of the level of sophistication at which they were operating. Core values, integrity, honesty in spades, but had to raise the firm, had to raise the capacity of the firm. And so I was on the owner side of this, watching this unfold before me. At the same time, John could also see the sands shifting beneath his feet and knew that there was heightened competition. Nationals were moving into the marketplace. We are Manitoba's builder. We work in Manitoba. We work outside Manitoba if a client wants to take us there, and we've done that. But most of our market is in Manitoba. And so he knew that he would have to raise his compete level. And as it happens, I was also, at that time sort of thinking about and seeing some other external influences. This is where the T-shape comes in. There was a move within the construction industry toward integrated project delivery. Now, that's not a form of contract. It's really a philosophy around a collaborative form of contracting where the teams come together and create value as an entity as opposed to treating a project as a zero-sum game. So all of these things were happening. I asked myself at that point in my career, where do I think I can make a difference? And I thought I could make a difference here. Reached out to John, said, hey, here's what I'm thinking. Here's some of the things that I see. Here's, how I see the world evolving. He said, funny you should say that, because he's kind of seen many of the same things, particularly through his involvement in CCA. We had dinner. It was done. Came into the senior leadership group. And I'm very proud to say that since joining the team and with the team, we've tripled our revenues. We've grown at pretty much 11% year over year for the past 12 years, I guess, or thereabouts. Certainly much faster than the market. So we've increased our market share. We feel very comfortable competing at the highest levels. We've both, in terms of our surface area, in terms of our competitive surface area, we've increased that. Size of project, breadth of projects we've managed to do all those things. But market's taken a ton of work. What I will share with you is when I joined the firm, and to John's credit, bought into the vision that we needed to change. There was a number of people working for us who were invited to join us on this journey and chose not to. So we really had a pretty high turnover, which in a family-owned business is difficult. And I give them credit. And to this day, if you ask me, I thank them for leaving. Why? Because the worst thing anybody can do is quit and stay. They didn't want to come on the journey, and that's okay. And they left, and and we retooled. And anyway, I'm hoping they're happy doing what they're doing. But from our perspective, we needed to retool. And for those who wanted to stay with us, it was fantastic. And those who didn't want to, that was okay too.
You mentioned a high turnover rate when the change was taking place. What are other obstacles or hurdles that you've encountered over the last just over a decade here in Inboxstall as you've seen growth, as you've tried to create this change and help with the change?
Well, interestingly enough, many of the challenges come with scale. So if you we're in the project delivery business, and I've always been in the project delivery business, whether I was in consulting or at Boxstall on the construction side. And the primacy of the project rules. We have a project, we have a client, and it takes precedence over everything else. And everything we do supports that. We chose to compete in terms of our decisive competitive advantage on the client experience. So we said, we on the process side, we believe we're as competent as anybody, but we want to provide an exceptional client experience as well. Well, the bigger you get, it is increasingly challenging to ensure that every client gets that same client experience, because the reality is we're just inviting more people into the organization. And so we've had to really work hard at enhancing our onboarding process. Really make sure that people really understand our value proposition. And especially when we hire people from other firms, because their muscle memory is the other firm, and we need them to be us. And so we need to spend sufficient time with them to ensure they understand it, internalize it, understand what that means from a behavioral perspective. Like Maya Angelou said, right? People always remember how you made them feel. Well, they'll forget what you say, certainly. Sometimes forget what you do, but always remember how you make them feel. Well, we're in the how you make them feel business. And we're working hard to elevate our own status to earn the right to sit at the table as an advisor, as a partner, as opposed to just a service provider. So we've kind of raised the bar internally to do that. And that's been the biggest challenge is as we've grown, is making sure that we attract the right people and that we're able to support them so that they can deliver within the Boxstall value proposition.
You talked about muscle memory and how that muscle memory needs to be readapted to a new company culture. How long does it typically take?
It's interesting. So for the people who are in the office who we have contact with every day, I'm thinking probably within a year. We can all sort of get to the same place. What happens in the field, because we're a hub and spoke model, right? We have 30 sites at any one time. And so there it's a little bit different. Now there you've got people who, are in a very dynamic environment and need the toolkit and this tool set to be able to, react in the moment. And if we don't provide them with that toolkit, if we don't provide them with that support, they're going to react the way they used to. And so that to be honest with you, takes a little bit longer. I'd say that's probably a 2-year journey. And we just got to make sure that we provide the right level of oversight in order to make sure that we're progressing in the right way.
Maybe speak more to that then. What is the right level of oversight? How are you facilitating this change, whether it's a year or two, with your people?
So a couple of things that we've done. Our model is we're doer leaders, right? We very much are not hands-on in the day-to-day, but every one of our projects has a project executive, and that is one of the executive team. And we maintain the right level of oversight. We maintain contact. We maintain contact with the client. We will conduct sort of what I'll call an internal audit. We pay attention to the things that need to get paid attention to. And most importantly, we try to set the example. And I think that's the best way to do is by setting the example. So I'll give you an example, Mark, as I was listening to a podcast the other day, and I think Will Gadari, I believe is his name. Anyway, the bear, and he talked about the importance of polishing polishing wine glasses, right? And the importance that everybody understands how important that is to everybody. And so in our world, what does that mean? Well, what that means is if we have a commitment to excellence, that we display that commitment to excellence, that that if we're doing a monthly report, for example, there are no spelling errors, There are no grammar mistakes. Right? That's what I do. I edit for those things and make sure the content's appropriate as well. But what we're trying to get is we're trying to do it by example and say, this is our standard. And every time we cross paths, this is going to be our standard. And here's the expectation. And if you need some help, put up your hand and we'll try to give it to you. Does it work 100% of the time? Well, the answer is no. Humans are humans. And so it's a constant. So we have to really maintain a constant vigilance. We don't, it's not organization for the sake of organization. It's the primacy of the project, the primacy of the client. And we want it as close as possible, be able to give them the one box stall experience.
The image that comes to mind is how many times are you touching these people? How many times are you
Yeah.
in contact with each individual? How many touches do they have with you to be able to pull this from you, to be able to have this wear off on them? Does that make sense?
It does. And we do a lot of in-house training. So we spend a lot of time doing that. At a project level, I will participate at certain key and critical times and milestones. Try to get to the sites as much as I can. I can't say that I do that as often as I should, but as much as I can. Really pay attention. And technology has really helped us get there. We have a platform, a 24/7 interactive platform that we can use, and so our line of sight has increased tremendously. But making sure they know you're there, that you are paying attention, that you are keeping watch, that you are offering feedback on a fairly without micromanaging. I mean, we do have teams and they're responsible and they're accountable for the work that they do. So that's where the balance is. You need to be at the right level. I think about it as operate at 5,000 feet. Why? Because at 5,000 feet, I can see the contours. When you're coming down in a plane and you're at about 5,000 feet, the world suddenly becomes very clear. I don't want to be at the treetops, and I certainly don't want to be in the weeds. 5,000 feet is the right place, and it allows you to. That's the right level of oversight for us. That's how we think about it.
The other thing that's jumping into my head is going back to T-shaped leaders, that horizontal line. It is so valuable, as you said right off the bat, to be able to communicate, to be able to relate, to be able to see things from another person's perspective. That those soft skills that come in from years of experience and various challenges go a long way in this situation. Is that accurate?
Oh, you can't underestimate the soft skills. In fact, if you're taking part in our training, we have two sides to it. One of them is the technical part of what we do, and the other one is building high performance teams. Now, I want you to imagine you're in an environment. It's a bespoke environment. Every project's different, but every team is also different. So you can imagine you're on a factory floor and you're building a vehicle, and it's a brand new vehicle. You've never done this before. Oh, and by the way, all the people walking into the factory, you've never met them before either. 85% of the work that we do is delivered by somebody else in terms of our trade partners. And so, we've spent a lot of time really thinking about the way people behave. How do you build teams? How do you gauge level of endorsement? How do you get alignment? We've got a process called chartering that came from my CH2M Hill days. It's magic. In terms of getting everybody in the room and having a really good, robust discussion. It's not a kumbaya gig. It's a robust discussion around the project and what are the challenges and what are we going to do and how are we going to hold each other accountable? If one of us isn't doing what we're supposed to be doing, what does that accountability framework start to look like? Not punitively or poking people in the chest. What are we going to do? How do you recognize it? So we spend as much time on behavioral science as we do on the science of building. And that's one of the things we just have to do because that's where we live and that's what we want to do. And that's key to our ongoing value proposition.
I'm constantly thinking about higher level organizations and what separates an organization that looks decent to one that is actually outperforming everyone around it. And you've brought up a lot of the elements of that I think about all the time. But maybe go back to those robust discussions that you just alluded to. Give me some examples of how those discussions work and how you manage them so they're most profitable.
Yeah, so in terms of providing real-time feedback, real-time coaching, real-time teaching, and I always look at things through a sort of a teaching coaching lens, is say, okay, so first of all, you have to be timely. You can't say 3 months ago, I noticed you did this or did that or didn't do that. So you got to be in the moment, which means you have to have sufficient line of sight to be in the moment. You need to find out what the root cause was. Before jumping to conclusions, and quite frankly, in my traits, my low P is my dominant trait. So I really got to fight against that. And so, you got to just find out what happened and why. And then engage in just, again, through a teaching lens. is, okay, so if it was preventable, what are we going to do differently next time? How are we going to think about this differently? How do we get there? Some of it's, quite honestly, sometimes it's muscle memory. Sometimes it's not preventable. It's important to understand all those things. And again, to do it in real time, obviously do it respectfully, and understand that people live in pretty dynamic environments and also might have a bunch of stuff going on in their lives outside of what's happening at work that may impact them that day. So it's, pause, take a breath, figure it out, and make sure it's a safe space, safe place, so that they understand that really what we're trying to do is just move forward together. And again, it's not about poking people in the chest. So
Yeah, I'm going to paraphrase a quote here, and I'm gonna botch it, I'm sure, but simplicity on the near side of complexity is naive. Simplicity on the far side of complexity is wise. And what I've always taken that to mean is that if we haven't thought about the complexity of a situation, we got to tread carefully before giving simple solutions. But if we're willing to see the complexity of who a person is, what's going on in their life, whatever is going on in the project, once we're willing to go through that complexity, then we can offer simple solutions that have depth, or that have that are helpful rather than trite. Does that make any sense?
that's a really keen insight, Mark. Simplicity is hard. Taking complex problems and driving them down, so that the solution is visible and understandable. That takes a ton of work. Just living in the world of complexity actually is a little easier than doing all of that. So you're absolutely right. The ability to sit there and synthesize those, the engineer in me defaults to design thinking, right? It's break things down to their elements, really understand them. If you were in my office, you would hear me preach constantly about, if you don't understand the first principles, we're not having this conversation. If you haven't done the work to understand first principles so that we can actually break it down into its components and then build it back up into a solution, then we're just technicians, you know. And so I'm a big believer in first principles. I'm a huge believer in design thinking, and I spend a lot of time trying to make things that are complex a little simpler to understand.
That is so valuable on so many levels, and again comes back to this T-shaped leader that we've been alluding
Yeah.
to constantly through here. Okay, we also talked before this interview about, in the context of AI, kind of what is the importance of defining competitive advantages. You've mentioned competitive advantages a couple of times in this interview, but let's jump into this part of the discussion a little bit. Again,
Sure.
AI. Give me your thoughts on AI, and again, defining competitive advantages, how valuable that is.
Yeah, so I think first of all that AI, the world of AI, and as we know, there's many forms of AI, that it is one of the most exciting times in the history of personkind. It really is. We have never seen anything like this, and so it's an exciting time to be alive. So I'm a big fan. I know there are challenges. I know there needs to be some sort of regulatory framework that, bad actors can do really bad things. I get all of that. But I think on the whole, it's going to have the ability to improve the human condition is going to be significant. Having said all of that, one time, if you're competing on the basis of three aspects: information, analytics, or the ability to execute, and relationships. Relationships is great because they're quite often not imitable, right? Um, Analytics is good because, if you can solve complex problems for clients, that's what they expect you to do. And at one time, when I was, growing up in this industry, if you worked hard enough and stayed ahead of things, you were also a source of information. Well, guess what? The internet democratized information. AI has, to a large extent, going to democratize the analytics. In fact, it'll do things that the humans can never even do. And so now you're left with relationships, which you really have to work hard at in terms of maintaining that competitive advantage. But you also really need to understand how AI can augment what you do. So I'll give you an example. I do a lot in our space in terms of marketing and business development. And the way I use and think about AI is I like to write. But what I will do is I'll sort of pen my first draft, and then I'll pop it into my choice of AI and say, just edit for clarity. You're an editor. Here's the target audience. Here's what it is. Just edit this thing for clarity. And it does. I never leave. That's never the end, but it gives me something more to work with. I don't spend less time doing it. So if I was going to spend an hour doing it, I still spend an hour, but boy, that hour is so much more productive because my end product is so much better than if I hadn't used it that way. And so I don't use it for my initial foray, but I do use it in that editing support you know, methodology, and that really works for me. Now that's a really simple thing, and I can't, in terms of our business, Mark, one of the things that AI is going to give us is foreseeability, right? We live in a world of constant change. If we can use it in predictive analytics, then in fact, it's going to be a huge win. What we need to think about is our size and our scale, because we are not a national and we're not an international. The size of the data set that's available to us is going to be much smaller than the nationals will have. And the reality is there's going to be a bifurcation at some point. They may weaponize that. I would if I was them, but they may do that. So how do we think about it? Well, we need to think about it by being really clever about our use cases, understanding what our minimum viable product is, understanding how we will use it to augment the client experience. In other words, how do we fit it to do what we do, which is compete on the basis of relationships, trying to create an exceptional client experience, and how do we augment that? You can't go head to head. I mean, you really got to understand if you're playing offense or defense. And one of the best books I ever read was in the early 80s, called Marketing Warfare by Reese and Trout. Great book. From a first principles perspective, all based on von Clausewitz's On War. Actually, his wife finished the tome for him after he died. But nonetheless, to this day, I still think about it that way. If it's a full offensive attack, I got to outnumber my competition at the point of attack 10-1. If I'm playing defense, how am I deepening and widening my moat? It doesn't make sense to flank. It doesn't make sense to just have a guerrilla attack, right? Establish a toehold, and then end up, trying to spread out from there. All of those things are things that I still think about. Those are fundamentally first principles. With AI, what I'm saying is, okay, now how can I use AI to help me make those decisions faster, better, more informed?
Okay, so again, going back to this and talking about competitive advantage, if I've got this right, I'm trying to summarize it here, Carmen. You're talking about, again, offense, defense. How am I protecting my organization and my hold in this industry? How am I moving and taking over more of this industry? And that AI in analytics and information is going to be my help in defining my competitive advantage. Is that an accurate summary?
Absolutely. One of the things that in our world, we live with fixed response times. So to any problem that shows up, we have a fixed response time within our contractual obligations. And when you think about fixed response time, there's two components to it: time to recognition, time to solution. If I can shorten my time to recognition, I can lengthen my time to solution. That's where the advantage lies. To help me from a predictive perspective, to get a better line of sight on what may happen, to take risk management to the next level. That's a real benefit for us. Because then we start to build that muscle memory in advance. So when it happens, or if it happens, our team goes, "Oh, I've seen that before." In their minds, they've seen it. They've worked the solution. They can start to really think about implementation. That is a huge game changer, as opposed to just fighting fires all day.
This went a different direction than I assumed it was going to go, Carmen. I assumed that when you talked about the three aspects, you talked about information analytics and relationships. I thought you were going to say, let's double down on relationships, because this is what can again differentiate compared to our competition, differentiate from our competition. And you actually went, no, let's use AI with its strengths, doing things that are going to be better than what we do, to be competitively advantageous compared to other companies again.
Yeah, Mark, and again, great insight on your part. When we think about relationships, what we think about are relationships built through value creation. There are social relationships. You have to have those. There's no doubt about that. It's somewhat easy becoming a friend, but that has a very limited runway. If you're not creating value for your clients on an ongoing basis, you cannot deepen those relationships. You cannot strengthen that umbilical cord. And so that's where we come from, is to really think about how do we use AI to create value. And the only people who, by the way, decide if we're creating value or not is our clients. So we have to test it to deepen our relationships, because otherwise we're friends. And that only gets you so far.
Yeah, and when things go a little off the rails, we quickly discover where some of the problems are and holes in friendships, right? Where if there's consistent value, there's no need to worry about anything else, really,
No.
generally speaking. Okay, so let's finish off here with a little bit of kind of maybe a couple of personal questions for you. You came
Sure.
into a family-owned business from the outside. Again, I talked about this a little bit, but again, what was that like? You talked about there aren't very many Militanos in the organization,
No, they're
right?
not.
So
No.
so what was that like? Again, what was difficult about that for you, or maybe the organization? You talked about some turnover, and then how are you helping raise up a new generation of leaders that is still a family organization?
Yeah. So great question. So I'm the one that doesn't look like the other one. So, uh, and so I had the opportunity to come into an organization with no biases. I didn't have the family history. It wasn't my history. And I was able to take an objective look at where we were relative to where we wanted to be and chart a course. Now, I needed the support of the family to do that. You cannot do that if you don't have the support of the family. And to be frank with you, I became the lightning rod in many cases, right? The change maker. Some people saw that as a positive, and some people didn't see that as a positive. And the ones that didn't, of course, left our organization. But I had the luxury of doing that because I wasn't a family member, right? And it was okay. It's not easy to do, and it's not easy to be in that position, but it was okay. But it's really that the ability to go to the balcony, look down, and say, okay, what am I seeing? What am I really seeing? What's going on? Where are we? Where's our competitive advantage or disadvantage? What do we need? Where's the gap? How do we fill that gap? How do we build on our strengths? And so it's almost, and because I came from a consulting background, it was almost like being a consultant for the first little while, except I was in-house and said, okay, so if we're going to make some changes, how do we do that? And where do we go? And I had the opportunity to do that because I wasn't a family member, right? I didn't have the blinders sometimes that are associated with, there's lots of good things about family ownership. One of them is you're not driven by the next quarterly report, right? We can take the long view. We can do things for the long term, but you also sometimes it becomes a bit of an echo chamber. And so I was outside the echo chamber and was able to, I think, define what we could do to get there. And I still serve that role, right? I'm still the one on the outside because of where I came from. And it's not that the family members have a sense of entitlement. They don't. We're a meritocracy, and every one of them has earned their place, and it's fantastic, and it's great to watch. But having said that, having lived through what I've lived through, I've always got this bit of a paranoia. When you've been through a couple of recessions and all these other things, you always know that things can change in an instant, and that's my voice. My voice needs to be that. Well, wait a second. What if? Right? To say this may happen. Like, believe me, you've never seen it, but trust me, this may happen, and if it does, what are we going to do? And to try to ensure that we really work toward becoming a people and performance culture. Sometimes family businesses are people businesses, really invested in the development of their folks, maybe a little less so on the performance side. And performance, and McKinsey did a study actually, and performance and people cultures outperform their peers. Like it's like 3 to 4 to 1. I mean, it's really substantial. I heard someone describe it once as, business isn't Timbits, right? In Timbits, with all due respect to Timbits, great organization, you know, everybody tries hard, do your best, everybody gets a medal. It's not the way business works. It's not enough just to try hard. You really have to succeed at what you're doing. I borrowed that from Winston Churchill, almost verbatim, but it's a fact. And so again, when you're outside of the family, I think you can say, no, look, here's the accountability framework, right? How are we doing this? And yeah, sometimes you're going to have to make really hard decisions. And yes, sometimes these folks have been with you for a long time, and that takes a ton of courage on the part of the family. If I leave you with anything, it's the amount of courage that it takes when you're a family-owned business to let someone from the outside come in and really start to affect some change. And to John's credit, and Nick and Dan, and now Sarah has joined the team, they've done that.
Again, you took it in a different way than I was going to go here, Carmen, which I really appreciate. It's like if you watch a movie and you already know the ending, there's no fun in it, right? When it throws you for a loop, it's
Yeah.
always a little bit more enjoyable. But when I asked this, I was assuming the challenges, because I think that is easily seen. You pointed out something that I believe is a really unique advantage of bringing somebody from the outside, and that is the lightning rod side of things.
Yeah,
If somebody can come in, if there needs to be cleansing, which there needs to be everywhere all the time, and whether
yeah,
it's a house or a kitchen or an organization, there
it
needs
just
to be
happens.
constant cleaning. But every once in a while, if you need a little bit more of a cleanse, bringing somebody from the outside who is comfortable and can handle on their shoulders that lightning rod side of managing change can be a huge advantage. And I think about how advantageous that is in a family-run business.
Yeah.
That's brilliant.
And the other thing that it provides, Mark, in addition to that, and again, great insight, is for all the other, we have 200 people that are working for us. For the 196 that aren't family members, my presence, I think, lets them know that, you know what, there's not the family glass ceiling, that if you contribute and you make a difference, there's a place for you in our organization. So we like to think of ourselves as a professionally managed family-owned business, not just a family-owned business that you kind of get what you get. And again, it's a meritocracy. So I think that the signaling to the other 196 team members that, you know what, you, if you don't have that same last name, there's a place for you here. And that can't be said for all family-owned businesses.
I agree completely. I've worked to try to get into a couple of family businesses, and the something that has always pushed me away is going, hey, there's no chance that anything really changes here. And that was
Yeah.
a frustration for me thinking about it. You've mentioned meritocracy twice now. So one, I mean, what will foster meritocracy? You've talked about, hey, bringing people from outside can foster it
Yeah.
because people see an opening and say, hey, there is a chance that my idea, if it has merit, will gain credibility in this organization. How else do you foster a meritocracy in a family-owned business, Carmen?
So a couple of things. So first of all, we really work hard at diversification. So those are related actually, because it gives us a broader point of view. We have a really high percentage of females in leadership positions. And why? Not because we went out to hire females, because we went out to hire the best and the brightest. And guess what? You know, it's kind of the way it works out. And we also don't get hung up on seniority. You prove your worth, we're going to help you advance. This isn't about years in the business. I don't care how many breaths you've taken in life. It doesn't matter. You and I think, have probably both seen, people with 25 years experience, but it's 25 times 1 year of experience, who just basically been doing the same thing over and over again, who live in a constant state of stasis. That's not who we look for. We look for people who want to advance and really try to message that it's up to you. And if you show us that this is what you want to do, we'll help you get there.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for this. Now, before we go, I want to respect your time here. Is there any question that I should be asking you right now? If you were Mark sitting in front of Carmen, what would you be asking to just take a little bit more, maybe glean a little bit more from this conversation?
I think there's maybe some lessons learned in my journey that might be worth sharing.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So, when I first started, I worked for a firm called Reed Crowther, who has now eventually morphed into a firm called AECOM. There's a big consolidation in the industry. And that was the first time that I was really introduced to the power of a proactive sales process in consulting. That, the usual sort of dogma that all you have to do is do good work. That good work is table stakes, right? That if you can engage in a proactive sales process, and I was fortunate to become a certified trainer in, actually was a Xeroxer at that time, learning international sales process, the power of that, things that I still use today. And there I also learned about how powerful it can be when you're friends with the people you work with. It was a relatively small office at that time in a difficult time. These were the two recessions. These were the two recessions, and people had to dig really deep. And so when you became friends with those, the folks you work with, boy, it makes a big difference in terms of people sort of stepping up and trying to help you out. At CH2M Mill, I learned that you can grow organically if you have an unrelentless commitment to your value proposition and you hire for that, and there's an accountability framework. And, when I joined the firm, I think it was 14,000 people. When I left, it was 20,000. Most of that was organic. That's almost unheard of today. And why? Because even a firm that size, if you have a culture of entrepreneurialism, a culture of excellence, a culture of agility, it works. You know, it really works. At Stantec, I learned the discipline of a publicly listed company. You know, there is something to be said for those quarterly earnings reports, where you have to, you have to perform. And again, there's an accountability framework around that. I worked for CCI Industries. I think I mentioned I was in the concrete products business, trying to imbue a piece of concrete. You think about it, it's just gray, and differentiate it. Those are invaluable lessons. And there I learned the difference between, pull marketing and push marketing, product-led growth or platform. You create platforms. Then it's always, provide some wraparound services. Like decide where you're going to differentiate and then go do it. And understand what your competitive situation is. Because if you leave people with no choice, they will select on price, but that's the choice you make because you left them with that being the only choice. So if you can wrap it with something that makes sense again, that's value added, that creates some value. So all of these things, by the time I got to Boxstall, they all sort of combined, I think, to help me do what we do here. Because it's that life experience
That makes
that you want
sense.
to pay attention to.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes so much sense to me. Carmen, again, I've got one more question now.
Sure.
You talked about proactive sales. Break that down a little bit for somebody who's new to it. What does proactive sales mean to you?
So what it means is being very intentional about positioning. When you're in the project business, the only way you're ever going to get an edge, a true edge, is to position for the work. And that means getting out in front of that project ahead of the RFP, the request for proposal coming out. Because at that point in time, the cone of silence descends. The first words in that RFP are, if you dare talk to anybody about any of this, you will be disqualified. Pretty tough to try to get any more information. And I get why they do it, to make sure that everybody's on the same playing field. So positioning, and this gets back to those T-shaped leaders. In order for you to position, you need to know what's happening in the marketplace, where the trends are, where the headwinds are, where the tailwinds are. Taking a look at your growth MRI, right? To see, just because you do it doesn't mean somebody's going to want it. And in fact, they may want something you're not doing today. And so that whole notion of positioning, getting it on the marketplace and listening, spending all your time listening, asking good questions so that you get good information at the same time offering something in exchange for that. And so, the process is called need satisfaction selling, was the Learning International process. I adapted it over time to do what we do, but it's really getting in front of it, getting out into the marketplace, being very intentional around brand management, about market management, market shaping, looking for those white space opportunities. Add your personal brand all on top of that, and it all works. But boy, it takes a ton of work.
Was that not fantastic? Again, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. I wanted to summarize a couple of things that took place during this interview, things that I'm thinking about a lot. One, obviously, is T-shaped leaders. You need breadth and depth, thinking critically, contributing to society, communication, leadership. He talked about the breadth of skill set, where there are very many soft skills that are developed when somebody is a serial learner, and how that both protects somebody's career. So as we are raising up leaders, we are helping them, and we are helping our organization because it makes our organization so much more able to navigate various things that will come up. I mean, even at the end where he was talking about sales and how if you've got the right leader with those right soft skills that has the right experience, that is going to be able to navigate, get out in front of sales so much better and faster. Carmen talked about starting with some kind of competency, who has fire and is curious. Those are the two things that he mentioned. Competency, talking about that vertical line on the T-shaped leader, and the horizontal line being covered or starting to be covered by having fire and curiosity. These are the things that are so difficult to teach. Competency, again, is impossible to teach. You can teach experience, but competency to me is far deeper than simply experience. And yeah, I'd like your thoughts on that if you would challenge me on that in any way. Carmen talked about hitting notes between the notes and how a T-shaped leader helps a person adapt and meet people where they are at. It allows for flats and sharps and the notes between the flats and the sharps. I'm thinking about a piano keyboard with white and black keys. It's not simply having somebody who can play the black keys. It's somebody who can play notes between the black and white keys. And I love that concept of somebody who is just so versatile, and how, again, that helps them as an individual as well as helping the organization. We had a unique moment discussing muscle memory. He talked about how in the office it's so different than in the field for an organization, and where it's actually a difference of about a year, where he has seen the people on the field need an extra year to really erase former muscle memory and develop new muscle memory, and in how they connect with people. I love the metaphor that Carmine gave of operating at 5,000 feet, not too far and not too close, not so far away that you're not in contact. There aren't a lot of touches with your people in the field, and yet if you're too close and you're micromanaging, that's also not helping. And I thought about, again, in the context of T-shaped leaders, how if you are hiring, if you are developing these T-shaped leaders, they're going to be so much more able to adapt to situations as they come up. Robust discussions. This is another point that Carmine made. And I just kind of wrote down 4 points, 3 of them directly from what Carmine said, and then a 4th one that I kind of added to summarize the entire conversation. And that is, 1, he said, engage people immediately. Now, again, I get the sense that these are not always comfortable conversations, but they don't have to be super uncomfortable either. Number 1, engage immediately. Be timely in your engagement with people around you. 2, explore what actually happened and the antecedents to what happened. Number 3, there is a context to what has gone on. So it's not simply what happened from the outside, but understand the context of an individual and what they're going through and what might have contributed to their reactions or interactions with that situation. Number 4, it was just to summarize this all, was this is how we keep people accountable and help them grow. I believe that Carmine would agree with that as I kind of wrap it up there. Lastly, before I take off here and before I let you get on with your day, in the context of AI, soft skills are important. But I want you, if you have the chance, go back and re-listen to that portion of the podcast, of the episode, because when he talks about AI, he talks about it in such a unique way of getting ahead of the competition, of staying ahead of the competition. I'm not going to drop the book that he mentioned on marketing, but again, Carmine thinks in such unique ways. I have had to listen to this episode a couple of times just to make sure that I'm wrapping my mind around it correctly and getting all of it, maybe squeezing from the sponge that all that I can. And I'd encourage you to do the same. If there are episodes in this podcast that are just fantastic, what I've always done is, great episode, I just bookmark it. And then when I come back, maybe in a year, 6 months, a year and a half to the same podcast, I can re-listen to the episodes that have really stood out to me, and I see how much I have learned and grown in this journey as well. I wish you the best in your own leadership journey, in your organization's journey, and in building higher performing organizations around yourself. Enjoy your day.